Everybody again this week for the budget committee. I believe everyone's here. So if we can do, let's just go ahead and start with roll call.
Councilors Pitts,
Here.
Moe,
Here.
Rodley,
Here.
Stair,
Here.
Woodrow, Pictionary,
Present.
Luke Lundberg,
Here.
George Jesse,
Here.
Darlene Reich,
Here.
Stephen Schmunk,
Here.
Holly Shaper,
Here.
Paul Selby.
Here.
Chair, there are 11 members present and we have a quorum.
All right, thank you so much. Well, we don't have listed departments this time, so I believe we have the opportunity to go through as we want, or if no one else has an objection, I think it'd be worthwhile to just start off with do the police department as the first step.
We don't have an agenda or in order.
We don't have an order this year.
So it's similar to last year. What ended up happening was questions were asked and we bring up a department director and we move through it. There's no expectation that you'll have questions for every department. So rather than bring each individual up, we've just got an open question and discussion on the budget. Start with the first question. We'll bring up that director, and then anyone else who has questions for the director at that time, will have them ask. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I guess so. It seems a little.
I do want to try to get at least every director to give some kind of feedback, or have some sort of conversation about their department. I think it's helpful to have everybody at least, I know they did the presentations, but at least present for this and do it at some point. But like you say, I know that some departments don't end up having as many questions, so we can start off with the police. I think that that's a good place to start. I think it's going to be a long discussion. So if we start with it, we can start moving forward from there. Unless anybody else has any objection to that or wants to do a different order. Yes, Councilor Pictionary.
I was just thinking that, it seems cumbersome to bounce around from department to department. So
Yeah.
we get that. And so to eliminate that, I think we should go department to department. So if anybody has.
That is my goal. Is not
Okay.
if we have one question for police, then somebody else asks a question for fire department, we're gonna jump back and forth. We'll
Right.
just start with one department.
Right.
And when we're completed with that discussion, that department is done and we will move on to the next discussion.
Right. And so to finish up is what I was thinking is that if we look at departments that typically do not have many questions, then that way those folks don't need to wait around or tie
That's
up
fine.
staff time when we know, like you said, that let's say the
Yeah.
PD is going to take up a lot of discussion time, then I think
Yes.
it would be respectful to go through the other departments where it may not take as much time and it would release those staff members.
Yep, that was my other thought, and I flipped a coin. So no, I appreciate that idea. Any other thoughts from anybody else?
Well, I do want to mention, Councilor Pictionary, that we've asked that they remain for the entire meeting this evening on the possibility that questions could come up later. So that expectation is already there for them. It's very considerate of you, but I'm feeling most of them will stick around.
Okay.
All right. Does anyone else have a preference of how we go about this, as we do not have a set agenda? Holly?
Thank you. I raised my hand using the feature
Oh, yeah.
in Zoom. Is that still the right way to go about indicating?
I'm going to try to watch the screens. I know that last week some people didn't have them pop up, and so it's just whichever works best for you.
Okay.
Go for it. So
Thank you.
And I don't have that feature again.
Yeah,
this
so
week.
if you're more comfortable, I know that in other settings with meetings is people just wave at the screen. I have everybody's screen open. I'm going to try my best to keep an eye on it and write down. I have a list here. I'm going to write down in order who raises their hand, and I'll check them off one by one. So I
Thank
will
you.
miss somebody. I apologize in advance, but I will try my best here. So George.
I wasn't,
Oh, sorry.
okay.
Sorry. No. Go ahead, Holly.
Sorry, George. Yeah, so I was just going to sort of echo what Nathan had mentioned. If we're asking a department questions or department staff questions and we close the conversation, are we necessarily prevented from asking follow-up questions should questions arise within a discussion with a different department chair? So like if we're talking to finance, let's say, and something within that discussion raises a question for the city attorney's office, will we be able to bounce to the city attorney's office again, even if we've already finished asking or having that discussion initially?
Yes, that's our intention. Everyone will stick around the entirety of the meeting.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
just the goal, so that way we're not dragging on too long as much as possible, is try and contain them all in one discussion. But as Nathan said, that they are available. George?
I assume that everyone received the responses to the questions submitted by several committee members. And there was a number of questions that said staff would continue to gather information and submit follow-up memos. So I assume that means we probably should wait asking those types of questions because there'll be a subsequent memo coming.
There will be a subsequent memo coming, but you're still welcome to ask the question and have someone respond to it. You know, if that's the case, a lot of times we're pushing these out to department heads and waiting for that to come back to us, but you can bring that department head up and ask that question if you'd like. So it's up to you if you'd like to wait and see the response. That'll be published on Friday for the most recent questions, or you're free to ask again this evening.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments before we get started on any of these departments?
And Luke, I'm going to send you a list of all the departments.
Yep.
You have a little cheat sheet to go off of.
Appreciate it. You know, I'm just going to go off of the order that you, whatever it is right here.
The first one I put on there was CMO.
All right, let's do city manager's office. Turn it over to Nancy then.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And welcome to your first fun night of deliberations. We'll try to be rather brief. We have some minor changes in the city manager's office to go over. I've asked Neil Ladati to just kind of talk about some of the variances in our budget from this year to last year that may look a little off. As far as staffing, I want to speak briefly to that. We had one position in our office retire. Rita Grimes retired in late April. And so I wanted to use that as an opportunity to really, now that I've had a year, in a kind of year, I mean, we haven't all been together, but to kind of look at, you know, the work of our staff, I restructured a little bit that position, and we're in a recruitment now to fill that position for more of an analyst, that somebody that can do some analyst functions as well as the front desk. So it will be a special person that we can get that can do both. But I think we need to have that little added capacity in our office because we are so small. And I also did an allocation of part of Neil Ladati, the assistant city manager's salary to reflect the fact that all of the public works functions report to Neil. He spends a lot of his time in that world, helping in those areas, and also being an interface with developers and myself and the council. So he's also our kind of our go-to guy when it comes to knowing what developments we have going on and what's going on out there in the city. So I wanted to structure that appropriately. And then Neil will go over just a couple other items.
Sure, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, as Nancy mentioned, and some of this was covered in our video, but a couple of these items were not. As Nancy mentioned, under my role as working as the department of the director in DPW, you'll see funds now within a financial summary in CMO by fund. You'll see funds that were not in there previously: building code, sanitary sewer, regional wastewater. Those funds will not have any allocation in the previous fiscal years, 19, 20, 21, but you'll see those now. As Nancy mentioned, that's in recognition of some of the work we're doing now with DPW. You'll also see some number differences. Basically, our M&S has stayed the same, but when you look at the numbers, you will see some differences. For example, Fund 208, the transient room tax, you'll see that it typically fluctuates from 200 to 400,000 approximately. But for example, on page 3, you'll see that fiscal year 21, it was an $800,000 range. And then this year we're proposed back down to 233. We're still doing a lot of work in economic development. And so that number from fiscal year 21 shows a lot of the supplemental budget work that the council approved, the purchase of the Gateway property, the Olympic trials, the assistance for Emerald Arts. So there was a transfusion of money into that fund to pay for those items. And this year's number is more in line with what it typically is. So that's one of the changes you might see. You'll also see that those SBs will impact other funds in the financial summary by program. For example, again, since we were talking about economic development, you'll see the number goes to $711,000 in fiscal year 21 and then back down to 256. Again, we were still doing site work, environmentals, just doing whatever we could to make sure that development was moving forward during the pandemic. So some of those numbers, that's the difference you'll see. Other than that, our budget is pretty status quo as far as M&S and personnel. And we did get a few questions. I think we answered those, and we're happy to come back either tonight or later if there are additional questions on those initial ones we received.
I will just say, just to wrap up, it's an interesting structure that we have. And I think it's just in the city manager's office, I think it's just because of we're, a smaller city, and to have economic development within the city manager's office and budget, it kind of can skew things because sometimes you work on a big project and there's a lot of work around that, and so it can kind of make the numbers move around a little bit more than you would if that was a standalone department. So that's why we're calling out a lot of those differences.
And I would mention that these are really good things that happened to the city over the last year. These allocations went to some very positive projects.
All right. Thank you, Neil and Nancy. Does anybody have any questions for them at this time? Anything that popped up in the budget when you were looking it over? Yes, George.
I guess to follow up on the question I had about allocating FTE in the city manager's office and some other areas into enterprise funds, I think that's not typical. And I guess my biggest concern for some of these enterprise funds, streets, sewers, both sanitary and storm, is that funds will get diverted from actual projects or improvements in the city's infrastructure, and will get eaten up in administration, planning, studies, and kind of other activities aren't directly related to improvements to streets, to sidewalks, to sanitary and storm sewer. And I guess that was my biggest concern about starting to see more money being placed in non-traditional enterprise fund areas. And it looks like it's kind of because the general fund's short in some areas, that it's just kind of filling in some of those areas that need additional funding. So that's my comment on that.
I would just, if you want a response on that one, in the case of the city manager's office, I felt that that was an appropriate use because it really does reflect the role of that Neil does. We previously, this is prior to me coming to the city, had a public works director that was a department director level position. It was a FTE. And then the department was restructured. It was a very large department. It was restructured, and then that position was never refilled. Neil took on a lot of that work for the oversight and direction of the three operational divisions within Public Works. And so to me, it was it was a recognition that I don't have an intention of filling that position at this time for a Public Works director. But that work still needs to be done. As far as other areas of the city, I understand your concern, and I think that's something that we are tracking as well. I think there is justification for administrative costs as part of the work that we do supporting those functions, but duly noted to make sure that we are always trying to keep those in check.
Thank you.
Any other questions for either Nancy or Neil right now? All right. I guess I will say thank you to both of you, and we will go ahead and move on to our next department.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next up on this list, I have city attorney. So Mary Bridget Smith, if she is with us.
Hello, Budget Committee and Council. I'm here. I apologize. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We had a little childcare schedule conflict, so I'm in my van at soccer practice, but I have the materials with me and I'm ready to answer any questions that you may have about the city attorney's office. We, in terms of budget and our presentation, don't have a lot of difference from last year in terms of budget. We are taking over management of the city prosecutor contract. That had been a part of legal services, but it was the contract was negotiated and managed by finance, but now we're doing that. Still the same FTE, really looking forward to the next year in terms of working on supporting economic development, police reform, CETA's work, and then whatever else the other departments are looking to do some work on.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the city attorney's office at this time? Yes, Nancy.
I just wanted to, if I may briefly just commend the excellent work that Mary Bridget Smith and her staff do in our city attorney's office. It's just amazing how much they can do with a very small staff and the depth of their knowledge. And I really rely on them, Mary Bridget and Christina, a lot for just their comprehensive knowledge, and they're a pleasure to work with as well. So thank you. And Linda,
well, thank you.
Sorry, I forgot Linda.
No problem. I'll let them know. We love doing this work and feel proud of working with the city. So, but I'll be sure to let the folks know that.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions at this time? All right. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you.
Okay. So next up on this list, I've got human resources. And that would be, let me check my other list. James, I believe I pronounced that correct.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi.
I apologize. I am switching locations within my house to avoid the noise, so I am going from one spot to the next. So, anyways, I am Chan Hertz. I'm the HR director here at the City of Springfield. I've been around here for 4 years. It certainly has been an exciting and dynamic 4-year period. With regards to the budget, I don't have a lot to share beyond what was in the video. We budgeted a status quo budget. There certainly have been changes in the budgets over the 4 years that seems to reflect an increase in cost. A lot of that is attributed to some centralization that we did in the funding and the budget to workers' compensation. And the other piece that obviously gets into there is that we have fiduciary responsibilities of our insurance funds, which includes benefits, liability, workers' compensation. And so those certainly drive up our budget costs. We're a very lean HR department. We reduced 2 FTE shortly after I started. We had 9 FTE back in 2017. That dropped down to 7, which is what we're currently status at. We're a very complicated organization and a dynamic organization within the HR group. And so it's really, when you look at it, it's about 4.5 FTE that are dedicated to what I would call core human resource functions, which oversees 5 collective bargaining agreements, including leading the labor negotiations for the merged fire unit between Eugene and Springfield. And then in addition to that, we have a 1.5 FTE that's dedicated to our risk program, and then an additional FTE, which is payroll, which is traditionally in a finance group, but has been part of the HR department for a number of years. So I think that's the better way to look at that. We have a number of activities and events that are coming forward. We've been trying to get more engaged in citywide training, even though we don't have the resources to really support that, but we've been working in that area to move into that. And then we're also going through a pretty complicated change with our workers' compensation provider. We're moving away from CIS, who is in the process of trying to get out of that arena a little bit anyways. And we're moving over to SAFE, which will long-term have significant savings to the city within the range of a couple $100,000. It's going to take us a couple of years to get there, but once we do the full transition, there'll be an overall cost savings to the city. I also have Tom McGleston. I understand there may be some questions around liability as it relates to police claims. And so I do have Tom McGleston, I think, who's in the audience, who can help with some of the more complicated questions that you might have specific to liability insurance. So I'll pause and take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, Leonard, I believe you were waving your hand. Yes. Councilor Stair. Or possibly not.
I was actually.
Okay, yes. All right.
I wanted to just ask Shane, in the case of the negotiations with the fire department, I know that we've merged our operations with the Eugene Fire Department. Does Eugene HR, City of Eugene HR, collaborate in those negotiations with our HR department?
Yeah, it is a partnership negotiation. The traditional model is every 3 years we rotate, and Eugene leads the negotiations, and then Springfield leads the negotiations. 3 years ago, their lead negotiator for the city of Eugene left, and so then I was put in place to oversee it, and then to ensure that we had some continuity in negotiations, and knowing that the city of Eugene had hired recently a new labor person. The agreement was that I would continue to lead that, but we do, regardless of who's leading it, there's a HR member from both cities that participate in those negotiations.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. It is a very complicated arrangement to have a merged functioning fire department, but have 2 separate employers, both in the finance side on that, but also just in the pure HR component of it.
Councilor Pishneri.
So Shane, I'm curious, and in regards to, it's actually when Leonard brought up the subject of negotiations and et cetera and contracts, I'm curious as to Springfield, based on my memory, had smaller city comparators when it came to contract negotiations. And Eugene has a larger city comparators compared to what Springfield had. And of course, now with a combined force, it's even a larger agency comparators. And so would it be safe to say that because of that alone, the cost to the city of Springfield has increased disproportionately because of this, our ability to pay and our size of our city?
So disproportionately to the city of Eugene, or
Well,
disproportionately just in general for bargaining?
Well, we've got 50 some odd thousand here.
Yeah.
Eugene's got how many? 100,000. And so when you combine the two, then you have a larger comparator. Instead of comparing us alone to some city such as Tigard or Bend or, you know, that type of situation, then we're now being compared to, let's say, off the cuff, Tualatin Valley Fire District. And before that was not the case. And so with their, especially with fire districts, their ability to pay is much greater than a non-tax district agencies. So would it be safe to say that because of that, just because of that, our cost for operations, staffing in the fire department are greater than what they would probably be if our comparators remained the same at our size city?
Well, I don't want to give a definitive answer because I haven't done the analysis on that. And I know IAFF President Mike Haven would disagree with me if I said that that statement by you was completely accurate. What I can say is it does change the comparators to what we look at. So prior to the merger, we would look at comparative size communities to the size of Springfield. So, you know, plus or minus 20% or 50% of our population of 60,000. And all of the comparators at that time that we were looking at were municipalities with similar tax bases and similar tax revenue. When we merged the units per the Oregon Public Sector Bargaining Law, we now are comparing ourselves to organizations that are you know, in the 180,000 plus range, and we formed the second largest fire department in the state. And so we compare basically to districts in the city of Salem. That is so it's Clackamas, Gresham, TVFNR, and then Salem. And yeah, I think if you look at some of the details, there are some fundamental differences that are both in wages and then in fire. They've got this term called Kelly days, which is a way that they reduce the work week in order to address FLSA overtime or just in general to reduce the number of hours they work in a week. And so that changed that demographic pretty dramatically. And also because of the other thing that's probably more impactful is that we are comparing ourselves to 4 other entities versus 3 up, 3 down, which is a traditional model that you would look at. So your average comparator can change pretty dramatically year after year based on a single entity making a significant gain, either in reduction in work week or wages as a whole. So I think it's possible that's true. But I would need to do a deeper analysis with looking at what we would have looked at to figure out whether that's an accurate statement. But I would say from an assumption standpoint, there's probably some truth to what you're saying, Councilor Fishner.
So maybe as a Springfield tax-paying citizen, that would be a question that I would like to know if I am paying more because of that merge or not. And it seems like it would justify, in your own words, that you haven't done that analysis, and it may be that it's time to look at that and do that analysis to see if it's still a financially feasible and the best fiduciary responsible thing for us to stay part of for the citizens of Springfield. And I get all the 3rd Battalion issues, and you know, I totally get that, but I'm just talking dollars and cents here.
Yeah, so there's so when you think about a department, you've got your hard costs, which is your wages, and then in addition to that, you've got facilities, training, the ability to purchase equipment and supplies. So, you know, a hard analysis would need to take a look at all of those elements that go into the total cost of operation. And would it be more economic for Springfield if they had a separate, its own fire department versus a merged fire department? I can only look at it from the perspective of wages and benefit costs and some of those other components. But it would, it certainly it's a good conversation I think that council should have around this particular topic. It is, as I said, complicated. We're in a kind of a co-employment relationship. And so there are times that those firefighters are Springfield firefighters or Eugene firefighters, but most of the time they're Eugene Springfield firefighters. And so that's complicated. And then ultimately, who is the decision maker Is it the 2/3 partner, or is it the 1/3 partner? So those are those challenges that are out there, and it makes it very complicated. For me personally, on the HR side, it just makes the collective bargaining process more difficult. It certainly makes the human resources support more dynamic and different. But we are fortunate that we do, on the HR side, have a very good partnership with the city of Eugene, and we do work very collaboratively together to support the fire department.
Thanks. So maybe that's something where Nancy and Sean can take a look at, maybe putting on some sort of agenda topic and maybe a work session or something. So thanks, Shane.
Yeah, absolutely.
Councilor Mo?
When they were proposing the merger several years ago, we were told that if we merged, everything would be cheaper. And I don't think that's the case. I wish we hadn't done it. I'm biased for Springfield, of course, but I think Councilor Pictionary brings up a good point that I think he's aware of what I am. I don't think that happened for us. I think it's costing us a lot more than it would have. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Any other questions for Shane right now in the HR department? Oh, Holly?
Thank you. Yeah, I had a quick question and also a statement. I think, am I right, Nathan? I think I asked about the savings or not to the city for the combined fire, Eugene Springfield fire, and the city is actually currently working to commission an analysis to see if there was, if there have been savings. Is that accurate?
For the most part, and that's something I said last Tuesday evening. I know that City of Eugene has set money aside. We haven't specifically set money aside, but are willing to put up a proportionate share and absorb it through our fire budget. I'm going to let Nancy speak more to that.
I think this is part of a larger discussion about governance and fire. And I've talked to the mayor about it. And I think that, we talked about having a smaller group with elected officials. I know the city of Eugene has made that a similar request in their council of their city manager. And so, what we really want to frame up is what a fire governance task force might look like, what their charge would be, what they would want to look at. But certainly the premise of how the fire merged concept began would be a starting point. We can go through those originating documents and kind of fact check where we are today versus what the assumptions were with the creation of a merged district. But I think Mayor Van Gordon has a comment as well.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that. Like, I know that it's on the fall agenda to talk about the governance structure with the council, because when we did council, when we just met about the agenda, we just added it. And then I don't know, Nancy, do you have a timeline? I know that we have two folks between Steve Moe and Corey Rodley that are supposed to meet on that joint task force, but do you have any sense of when their first meeting is going to be?
I don't believe I have a date certain from the Eugene side of things. I know that the Eugene Council has been discussing this a little bit. They were ahead of us in this discussion, so they may be a little bit further along, but I will check with the city manager and see where they are in their planning purposes.
Holly, did you still have more?
Yeah, I did. I had a, if it's okay to switch topics a little bit from fire, I want to make sure that I'm not cutting anyone else off.
No, I think
Okay.
we're, yeah.
All right. I was wondering about the liability insurance. You spoke about it in your presentation, and I'm wondering if there's any sign that our liability insurance will decrease this year or if it will increase. Speaking as a Springfield taxpayer, that loss of funds and increase of fees is pretty concerning. And so I was wondering if there's any updates about that.
Well, yeah, so there's been a little bit of time since the video presentation and now, and it might be helpful also to, if we can pull up Tom Weston just to add additional details if possible. So we were very close to potentially losing the ability to be to purchase insurance with regards to police insurance. So our liability costs as a result of some of the more recent actions have increased. So the liability is now up to $500,000 per claim for the police department. There are some differences with some of the other departments that we have in existence, but that is the one that's pretty high risk. I think the actual fee that we pay on a regular basis went down, but our risk, should we have a claim, is significantly higher within the police department. We are taking a lot of actions to try to mitigate the risk, with the forming of the enterprise risk team as one example, and some of the other additional initiatives that we've undertaken with best practices work with CIS. We're taking a lot of actions to try to reduce the liability or the potential liability that we would have, but it's certainly policing is a volatile event, and so it's not like we can specifically control all of the variables that are out there. Tom, I don't know if you want more to add to that, or did I cover? Okay, so yeah, it is certainly an area of concern. I know not only for the community but for the city as a whole. As I said earlier, I've only been around for 4 years. I wasn't aware until about a year ago or a year and a half ago of where we sat. And I think that's the first time that CIS had provided us a good analysis of where we sit as compared to everybody else that's part of their membership or their CIS reserve fund. And at that time, we immediately started to take some additional actions to try to address some of those issues, including the jail best practice, and as well as the policing best practices, and started looking at a number of the policies and procedures that we had in there. Unfortunately, we had a lot of other things that had happened prior to us getting that notification that suddenly brought a lot of attention that the legal claim of that moved, and at that point, we created this kind of, I don't want to say balloon effect, but we had a lot of things that just piled on all at the same time that created a pretty significant risk and liability to the city. The one reason that we still have insurance at all has really been the fact that we've had a good partnership for CIS for a long period of time. And that long-standing relationship has been successful in allowing CIS to talk to their third-party insurers and ensure that they could continue to insure us. But that's where we sit at now. It will take some time before that changes. We've got to get those active tort claims that we have settled, and then we've also got to have a period of time where we don't have new claims, or at least claims that are not significant in cost value. We have had some really complicated personnel issues. One in particular that isn't actually in the forefront of your thoughts, that started off of what I would consider a pretty simple disciplinary process. That just snowballed into multiple different claims in a really weird and unusual way. And I would call that a pretty unusual situation. And those have nothing to do with some of the use of force events, but certainly had added complexity to our liability claims. But we also have, known use of force ones that were, it was in the news. They were concerning and they were expensive, and that had a big impact on us as a city.
So I'd like to jump in here if I may, if that's okay, Luke. I have my hand up. Sometimes I think we all get paranoid that you can't see our hands, but anyway, that's why I use the yellow one, because I think it's a little bit more visible. Anyway, I want to just take a moment, because I think this is a really important subject, to talk about the enterprise risk management program that we have begun. We have worked with CIS since I would say probably June of last year, just really fine-tuning a program that we are doing citywide. We meet monthly, and we are reviewing all of what might be potential exposures for the city, and assigning kind of a priority value. We have a matrix that we are working on, to really fill in what do we think our likely risks are, and then how are we going to work to mitigate those risks. I had a Zoom meeting with the CIS Board of Trustees where I talked to them about the progress that we as a city had made on our program overall. They were very impressed with that. I want to call out just a couple other things that we've done. We're embarking on doing more cybersecurity initiatives and trainings regarding that. We purchased some software program that will enable us to back up our systems in the event that somebody would attempt to do a ransomware attack on us. We have the ability to capture our information and not, be subject to that type of an attack. I mean, they could still try it, but they wouldn't be successful, is what I'm saying. So there's a host of ways that we are addressing risk in the city. But this is going to need time. It's going to take time to correct and turn it around. It's something that I'm working very heavily with the police department on, but I want to stress that it has to be an organizational culture throughout the entire city. And it's important to look at it that way because it truly is a citywide issue. I know that, police is the thing that naturally pops in people's mind. And yes, we've had bad risk exposure with that. We're not trying to hide that. But we also have to look, we have other areas where we could be at risk. Public works is another area where you can see accidents or injuries. And we really want to keep people healthy and have our exposure improved. So Holly, I just wanted you to know that that's a key priority for me. And I'm working on this one personally, and I have a lot of confidence in our HR department, and Shane and Tom are working really hard on that, and I've been impressed with the work that they've done so far.
The only thing I would add, Nancy, some of this is before you started, but the journey to getting the city to think in a risk prevention mindset has been work that Tom has been doing for some period of time. We initially tried to look at just a software purchase that started 7 years or 8 years ago, and just trying to find ways to get funding and resources to get that thing over the hurdle so that we could actually take more of an analytic approach versus what we do now, which is basically just administer the claims and track it onto a spreadsheet. And in some cases we can work on reimbursement or not, but we just don't have a lot of capacity to do a whole lot. And so the software will allow us to decentralize a good component of what I would call the busy work that has to get done to manage claims, and will allow Tom as well as our other half FTE to do more of the analytical approach. And so we're pleased that we were able to do that. I think in 2018, we hosted the CIS Enterprise Risk Training Program here at the Justice Center, and provided all of our leaders an opportunity, all of the executive team and others, to start learning about what does enterprise risk management look like. And then from there, we've been trying to work with our executive team members and other department members to start taking risk approaches to decision makings that we do, whether that's in IT and the selection and prioritization of software that they're going to work on. And ultimately, our long-term goal was to try to get it infused into the way we make budgetary decisions, which when I first started was a bit more of a gut and feel kind of approach, kind of a mixture between what the city managers and council wanted. And so we're evolving over time. We've definitely have been more involved in best practices reviews with CIS, not only in the police department, but in security of the facility and cybersecurity. We're also going through it on the HR area to make sure that our policies and practices are squared up, and we're following best practices. And so we're doing a whole lot with a very limited resources and very little technology solutions to support that. But I think the leadership from the very top of the city has made a huge impact for Tom and I on really changing the mindset, as well as Nate and the finance side of how we want to look at stuff moving forward. And so the engagement has been very different, and it's going to have a long-term positive effect for the city and the police department as a whole.
And Holly.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question. So the police and jail liability is increasing substantially. Is the city other claims remaining the same $50,000 per claim, or will that also be increasing?
For that specific question, I'm gonna let Tom answer that one.
Yeah, so for police liability, we have a 500,000 per claim deductible, but on all other citywide GL claims, we have a $100,000 per claim deductible. So that is an increase. If you went back last year, we had a 100,000 annual aggregate. So yeah, there is a potential. There's definitely some potential for increase there. But I think Chaim also mentioned there that with that, essentially we're moving more towards self-insurance. And with those increased deductibles, the premium for GL is dropping a little bit. So when you look at the budget, it doesn't look like there's much there, but the potential for some increase is there if we have some big claims.
Sorry, can I ask one? Or actually, Councillor Rodley, and then I can.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and finish
up.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, it sounds like the enterprise risk management or that ideology has been around since 2018, and it wasn't until it was mandated in the Kenny settlement in 2020 that the city started to adopt the actual software. I'm wondering if we are learning from past litigation in order to help sort of inform policy to minimize risk. For example, in the police department, reading lawsuits past, sexual harassment within the department has played a pretty big role in a number of internal lawsuits. And so could those be used to learn from so that we can have policy and procedures set up so that people outside the department are providing some oversight? Is that beginning to happen? And prior to enterprise risk management being mandated, was it happening?
Yeah, so let me start and I'll let Nancy or Tommy to jump into filling gaps. I think there were two different specific questions that you asked, and so I want to make sure I cover both of them as accurate, and your picture keeps moving on me as hands move. So if you see me looking, that's what that is. So the software product, which has got a vendor name of Origami, or the REMIS software that we're utilizing, is different than the enterprise risk program. The software had nothing to do with the Kenny settlement. That was something that we had been working on, Tom and I, since I think the day I started in 2017, knowing that he had been trying to work on it for some period of time, and it was trying to figure out how to get that into the budget cycle and how to get it into the IT schedule. And knowing that we were competing with significant other needs that seemed greater. And so we ultimately found a way within our risk reserve fund to be able to fund that product. And so we worked within the finance group to be able to do that, but it took a lot of work. So that is separate and wasn't related to the Kenny piece. The Kenny piece was certainly the enterprise risk management. I think that led it. I ultimately would say that Nancy is the one that really helped get that over the goalpost. I mean, we've talked about it for some period of time of how to infuse and how to do that and how to provide better information to the executive team. Do we do it? Executive team is separate. So we've been spending quite a bit, but at the end of the day, HR can recommend, but it takes the city manager to implement and endorse. And so Nancy led that implementation and allowed us to move forward with that activity. I sense she probably would have done it regardless of the Kenny, because it was something that was not specific just to police, but certainly when you think about your budget process and your budget decision making, we needed to have a better framework to allow us to make better decisions or more informed decisions, or at least to make more informed recommendations to council. So we were heading down that path. This just helped, and it's certainly something that we're embracing because it's a conversation with a data and an outcome that's measurable and achievable. And so I want to separate that out. As it relates to harassment in the workplace, there's not a lot I can talk about on the police tort claim because it's an active claim. What I would say is in the areas of professionalism or organizational culture, learning culture and training, I think that those are areas that aren't necessarily risk. It's just who we want to be as a city. And allegations and things come up from time to time, and we try to address and investigate and do that with the same level of sincerity that we do with any claim that happens with any particular department. What we've been trying to do in the HR arena, and when I first started here, I shared a kind of a presentation around my intent of building a foundational infrastructure that supports HR first and foremost. And for that, it's typically policies and procedures, which we didn't have a lot of. We relied heavily on contract language that had very vague pieces, but didn't have the nuts and bolts into that. And so I had shared at the executive team and to others when I first started, the first thing I was going to do was to get our policies rolled out and fully implemented, of which I would say that we are probably in the 90% completion rate of those. There's certainly odds and ends that we need to complete on. But when we allowed ourselves to get those policies and procedures and look at areas for opportunity and efficiencies within the HR group, then the HR group can move away from being an administrative service to a business partner to our various departments, which allows us to get more involved in training and education. And so that's where we're tipping towards, is we're starting to do more training and education. And so things like harassment training, workplace safety training, vehicle training, other kinds of liability trainings is not something that we do, or if we do it, it's pretty decentralized. And so we're still trying to figure out how to do that in a way that we can absorb within our group. I don't know if that's realistic. There's some pieces that we would need, such as a learning management software, as well as what I would call an education coordinator that can work with our departments and deliver centralized training or decentralized training in an effective way that's tracked and measurable. So those are on my long-term plans, and you'll see a white paper at some point, or somebody will see a white paper at some point over the next budget cycle that will focus not only on that. And Nancy and I have had some offline conversations around looking at a position that does that, as well as equity and inclusion. Two areas that we dramatically need to kind of spend some time and effort and focused attention to. It's just somewhat limited. So we're taking what I would call a Band-Aid approach. It's not what I would desire. It's not the most strategic way of doing it. But that's the way we're doing it at the moment. And then I think that there's some other key pieces, like having a true mission statement for the city, and that we could lean on and kind of focus our attention to. I think it's the other things that would be helpful. Mission and vision. I'm all about mission vision. And I came from Peace Health, so it's one of the areas that Peace Health is really strong at. So those are the things that we're looking at long term to really look at the way we have our culture in our organization, one that's here to serve its community, and doing that in a way that's, not only respectful to the community that we serve, but respectful to each other, because we also serve each other. Hopefully I answered all of your questions.
Councilor Rodley.
I feel like you just served me up. So thank you for that, both you and Nancy. I think that when Nancy talks to the culture, and this is really a comment more than a question, because I think that that those sort of intentional culture change and that melding of the training and the culture and the policy reduces the risk. And so I'm sure I will probably comment as we proceed through some of the other departments, but one of the things I've appreciated just in the first three, with the city manager's office and the city attorney and with HR, with your 2020 goals, you all three call out different versions of doing equity and inclusion, leading with a racial equity lens. So the fact that those are embedded into the goals for the coming year and hopefully beyond, I do think that those impact policy. They are that culture change that will indeed bring the risk levels down. So I just wanted to just acknowledge that I noticed that, I appreciate that, and that is a key piece of the work.
Thanks. Councilor Raleigh, as you know, I've done some speeches regarding my thoughts and past experience as a child and family members with regards to diversity. And in fact, I'm teed up for a 30-minute leadership training for the city of Eugene on Thursday to do that same presentation. And so it is certainly an area that's important to me. It's an extension of my grandmother, kind of the legacy. And so it is work that we continue to do, but it's a long journey to getting there. So, but thank you. Yep.
Anything else, Councilor Rodley? Okay. Holly?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for such a thorough explanation. And I agree with Councillor Rodley. It was really lovely in all of the department presentations to see the focus on equity and inclusion and diversity. So thank you for that. I also wanted to clarify that I was not talking about the current claim when I was asking about learning from past claims. I was talking about past claims that were settled already that allege the same behaviors and activities, if you will. And so I was wondering if those can be used to learn and try to prevent or create policy to prevent what is currently happening, because it's kind of, if you read those, the current claim is unfortunately not surprising. It's horrifying, but it's not surprising. And so that was more my question. So I apologize if it was confusing. I did not mean the current one, which I understand cannot be discussed. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to that we have made policy changes, and so we have implemented a number of policies, both our respectful place to work policy, which covers a broad sweeping areas with regards to workplace bullying, harassment, religious discrimination, age discrimination. So that's certainly an area that we've tried to look at. We've done some work with regards to our ADA accommodation process to make sure that that's not only legal, but is supportive to who we are as an organization, our open door policy. So just a host of policies that we've really looked at, in the sense of equity and inclusion, but also in the area of making sure that we create a professional place to work that's safe and comfortable for people and that they enjoy coming to work.
And then Nancy.
Thank you. Just really quickly, I wanted to thank Shane and his team for putting together and formalizing a lot of these policies that were very much needed, and to provide clarity about what our expectations are as a city and how we want to be. I want to add that I will speak briefly on the sexual harassment issue. When I became aware of the claim, I immediately looked into, and we instituted a citywide training on sexual harassment for all city staff. We are also making that training available for our city council. And that's through City County Insurance Services. Give a little plug to them. They have a great online learning platform. And so even though people might be in different areas, have different schedules, they can all take that training. Also, just for the department directors listening, surprise, I'm changing your evaluations. I just want to put this in here. I don't ordinarily talk about personnel issues, but I wanted you to know, because this is so important to me. The department directors will be evaluated also about how they incorporate risk management in their departments and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm adding that as part of the review process.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions for the HR department at this time? All right. Thank you both, James and Tom, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so next up on the list, we have finance. Nathan.
My mute didn't want to unmute. So just being mindful of time, I don't have a lot to add beyond my recorded presentation. So I am going to just open it up to questions.
Okay.
George, I think you promised to have one for me.
Did I not include it in my written questions?
Actually, you did.
It was about the indirect charges, yes. And I think you answered it. I'm not sure. I agree 100% with how it's explained there, but I guess we have some fundamental differences on what should be included in what in indirect and direct expenses. And a lot of that stems from my experience prior to dealing with enterprise funds. But thank you.
Yeah, and understandable. I just want to comment from that earlier conversation we had is that we do take just the general fund and its relation to the other funds very seriously in terms of trying to make sure that we aren't subsidizing one activity with another's revenues. And so we're mindful of that. We think about it as we set up our allocation methods. So I just want you to know that it's important to us.
I guess the proof in the pudding will be when user rates come up for review.
Were there any other? Okay, Holly.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for answering the question that I sent. It was really quite informative to learn that it's $103 per bed per day to house people in the Springfield Municipal Jail. And also the additional information that was provided. So thank you.
Any other questions, comments for now? All right. We've been at this an hour. Do we want to do a 10-minute break? No. Mo's saying no.
Keep going.
Keep going. Okay.
That's up to everybody else.
Yeah. All right. I'm good to keep going, but I know we have been here for an hour, and so it is a little bit of time. So okay, let's take a step up, and we'll do IT. And let me make sure that I have the correct person here. Brant.
Chair, I'm pulling up Brant Malik now.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. Can you guys see me here? I'm sorry. I'm in my house, as you can probably tell. First of all, just want to say thank you very much for your service on the budget committee. I know it's a lot of work. I know all of you have day jobs and coming in the evening. It's just, we really appreciate it. In IT, we service financial systems, human resource systems, facilities management systems, criminal justice systems, fire and life safety systems, community development systems, the library, and shared systems, which is like document management and network systems. And we also support security compliance. So you will hear software come up a lot tonight and software systems, and we're the ones that need to make that work. Like Nate, I'm not going to go through our presentation other than perhaps highlighting a few changes so that you're aware of those. If you have any questions, the numbers that were in my presentation showed the final FY22 proposed at 3,858, 859, and it's actually 100,000 less than that. So there's been an additional reduction. So just so that those numbers there, you're aware of what those are. Just want to say it's been a very interesting year for IT. We really had to just change gears when all this happened and get everybody set up to work from home and to get all of you set up to work from your home as well. And I know it's been rough. I know it's been difficult. I know sometimes the technology doesn't work. And as we know best in IT, it's, you know, when everything works well, people are happy. And when things start to go wrong is when we hear about it. So we're used to that. And that's where we kind of thrive in a sense. Again, I don't necessarily want to go through the budget presentation. And so I think I will open it up to questions that you guys may have. And I can't see you, so go ahead and please just speak up.
All right. Are there any questions right now? I do have a question. I guess mine's not necessarily specific about a program or anything, but I know that the IT department has basically come to these meetings every year that I've been on saying that we are essentially 10 years behind in some areas, we're 5 years behind in other areas, and you just don't have the funding in order to catch up to where we would need to be if you had it ideally today. So moving forward, I think that it's probably safe to say that we're not going to have less technology integrated into the city programs. So as we look forward, we're looking out 3-5 years. What are the biggest things that we should be keeping in mind? And where are the biggest vulnerabilities that we would need to find funding for in order to establish any sort of infrastructure to meet the basic needs today and going forward?
That's an excellent question. I think first of all, it's in looking at our enterprise systems. We've been using the same enterprise systems for a long time, and so we need to look at those, perhaps more nimble systems that are better, less maintenance. Security has been killing us. With especially the larger systems, we have quarterly security patches. We have kind of stop, drop, and patch where they're coming out with very high risk patches that need to be dealt with. So security is obviously going to continue to be a major area where we'll need to look at ways to properly resource, adjust, adapt. What we've been doing here is working with our regional partners as well. So like Lane County and their security program, working with the city of Eugene, working with the state. Some of our tools that we deploy actually collaborate with not only those regional players, but the state police, the FBI, NSA, CIA, FBI, and basically what some of these tools do, the intrusion detection system, for example, is it's continually monitoring IP addresses within our system and where they're connecting outside of our system. And so those help us determine when we have a problem happening, and we can respond to that quickly. But it's a common problem across the industry. Another thing I think is going to be the ongoing impacts of telework. When I speak with a lot of my counterparts in the private sector, a lot of them are not anticipating going back to bringing everybody back into the office, and in some cases anticipating keeping some of the same levels. So as we communicate with contractors out there, as we work with other agencies, and as we look at that within the organization as well, that kind of ongoing continued telework and how to secure that. You reach out to people working from home, from their personal computers. How can we protect our systems from that? We really proliferated the access to these endpoints. And so how do we manage that and make sure we're secure? So I think security, looking at those types of things, yeah. And then as you hear, and you're going to hear it all night long or all through these budget presentations, is just a real need to deploy technology, and then in our case to have that back end to support that, the databases, the servers, the network, and the security controls in place. Those are great questions. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Mayor Van Gordon.
So thank you. I had a question about the phone system.
Sure.
It feels like we've been working on the phone system for about, I don't know, 10 years or so. So how has our strategy adapted as we've talked about more folks on telework, maybe some people not coming back to the office? Like we've been on the same track for a while. We've invested quite a bit of money, and then you kind of have the rise of sort of a lot more, things like Zoom and Teams, and things that wouldn't require so much of a hard infrastructure investment in the actual building of City Hall.
That's a great question. And actually, in some ways, we're fortunate that we had to deploy some of these telework tools because they gave us clarity on which features we do not have to purchase with a phone system. So essentially what we're doing is now looking at that gap. So Teams is what we'll be using internally for meetings, and its functionality, whether it's for doing small group meetings within departments or even larger group meetings, looking at SharePoint and looking at some of the other applications and how those service the needs of internal operations. And so then when we're looking at a phone system, those are features that we do not have to purchase as part of that phone system. In some ways go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead and finish your thought.
Oh, I was going to say, and in some cases, we're doing work right now on the recabling. So we first, went into this project, and it's typical with phone projects, you start to discover issues with your infrastructure. And so right now we're looking at cabling. Well, that's going to also help with this now increased bandwidth we're dealing with all of these new tools for virtual meetings and sharing information online, as opposed to taking it into a meeting room and sitting down and laying it out on the table. So a lot of ways they're compatible. Of course, we want to be further along. We're pushing for that. We've had some distractions over the last years. But I think in a lot of ways, it's really helped us kind of hone the strategy on the phone system and really clarify what specific features we need.
So have you taken, because of the, I guess, availability of other lower cost functionality, have you taken cost out of the total program for the phones, the phone project?
We are currently negotiating, well, yeah, we're working on those final process, prices right now with First Line. And some features are packaged in with the overall, or included in the overall package. So I would say, yeah, because we were originally targeting, around 350,000 to 400,000 for software, and now we're around the $250,000 range. So actually on specific software we need to purchase, we have seen some changes there. A lot of that's been, working with Nate, and he's very good at keeping things very tight and focused. And so working on those elements as well. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yes, that does. I just want to be, because we've been working on this for so long, I really want to be conscientious of the fact that we're not over investing in the physical infrastructure, because the sort of nature of technology is sort of changing. And I guess the last question that I have, or about phones, that is are we saying hard deadline, everybody's committed, we're not going to see this in another budget again, it's going to be done by December? Or is that still like, we're going to see if we can't lap another decade here?
Yeah, we definitely don't want to lap another decade. And I do want to touch on the infrastructure. Our existing cabling, this building was actually constructed as a mall. And so then different businesses put in their own cabling. And actually, when we were doing some switch replacement in the environmental services area, we actually had cables that were corroded into the back of the switches. So we replaced switches, and that really helps the virtual work and also the phone system. But the cabling system is well over 20 years old. And so we really, as we dove into that, it's needed to move us forward. That's about an every 20-year replacement. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, and understand I'm teasing about the other decade,
Okay.
right? Like I don't mean to be too cheeky about
No, but we got to focus, and we're getting the contract signed right now, and those will have schedules in them, and we'll have deadlines. And I'm not quite ready to give you the exact date on that yet, but we are definitely targeting December of next year. So.
And I think it's important maybe for all of us to understand going into it that this is sort of a constant investment that we're going to have to make. Yep. And maybe just looking to continue to evaluate flexibility as new technologies come in line, about how to keep down our overall building cost to keep this solely functioning. Now, could you make a few comments? In your memo, you talk about deploying Office 365. Is that been gone well from a staff?
Yeah, no, it's
some increased productivity.
Thank you for asking. So basically what we did is we deployed Teams and SharePoint and moved a large share of public works data into the cloud and into SharePoint. And it is painful. It is a major mind shift for people working from a file structure and moving into SharePoint. That work started in November and completed in about February. We still have some work to continue on that, but it's a game changer. And I think it kind of reflects overall what happened with COVID is it pushed us into modern technologies, the ability to do meetings online now, moving forward with those types of tools. And now the people in public works that are using those tools, they're realizing the value. And in some cases, we had to, because we had people who were sharing information from their personal computers to their personal email between one another. And at least with the Teams and SharePoint, that's all within the government cloud, which we can monitor. It's encrypted at rest, it's encrypted in transport. And if you use those tools, it protects the data much more than somebody using the sneaker net. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you commenting to that. At my normal day job, we went through the Office 365 transition, and it sounds like it is as painful. Like, when you get it, you get it. But for people that have gone through it, I definitely feel their pain.
You're exactly right. Yeah. Thank you for asking about that. Mm-hmm.
Steve?
Yeah, so I'm curious about the difference between local servers within the city and the cloud platforms that you have. Can you give us a sense of percentages of each, or?
Yeah, we are still primarily locally hosted, and we're starting to move through that. As Nancy mentioned, we implemented a new data backup and protection system, which actually replicates our data in the cloud. So now we have quite a bit of information backed up in multiple places in the cloud, so that if we were attacked, we could quickly restore from those locations. And then, as I mentioned before, this move of these volumes of data from the Department of Public Works and Planning from local servers into the cloud, and we're still working through that with them. That was a huge amount of data in terms of our file and print storage. So I would say right now, you know, most of our large enterprise systems are on site, on premise. We're now doing recruitment remotely and a few other applications, but I don't have the exact percentages. I could get that back to you if you'd like to see that. I'd say probably a third in the cloud and 2/3 on site if you don't include the backup.
That's fine. I'm wondering, so have you discussed the concern about security that out on the cloud, and then also should you have a disruption in communication, is there a core platform for communications should that happen?
These are great questions. So yes, we think about that all the time. And as I mentioned a little bit with the mayor a few minutes ago, the movement of this working information, file and print data into SharePoint, we looked at this, the Microsoft Government Cloud, and any cloud solution, any local solution has its vulnerabilities. But at least this, with the government cloud, you have data centers that are stateside, so they're not off in another country. As I mentioned before, you have the encryption and at rest and in transport, and you also have the ability to monitor the data flows. And Microsoft provides a lot of tools to even further secure and tighten down that information. So no solution is totally safe, and I need to really emphasize that. But we take a lot of time to look at that and think about that and where the data is going, and especially when we're looking at the DDoS and the backup. The DDoS is the backup system that we implemented this last year. And that also, we looked at where are those sources, where are they going, how secure are those locations. It's a very important factor in looking at moving into the cloud. And it's also been why we've been a little bit slow to move into it, is to make sure we know what we're doing and where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Well, then one last question then on personnel. Some of these systems are pretty esoteric. I assume that if you get a loss, someone leaves for whatever reason, you do cross training and make sure that you do have backups as much as possible, particularly with systems that are, you know, robust and a core part of the city.
Yes, we back up everything. So we do backups, a lot of backups.
No, I'm talking about personnel.
And then on the personal side, we do work hard to do cross training, and we're continually to do that. The problem is when you're lean and you're running lean, that is not always an outcome of having everybody equally trained. So we do have some vulnerabilities there. We're aware of that. We work on that, and we try to do as much cross training as possible. But I'd say that is a weakness we have.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
George?
Well, I'll go ahead and ask the question I had put in writing about significant increases in expenditures within the enterprise funds for IT. Didn't really have, that I saw, a clear explanation. I guess in addition, it looked like the big increase actually happened in the current fiscal year, an amended budget. So for fiscal year 22, looks like it's a slight increase compared to that. So are those funds at a new normal for that? It didn't look like there was an increase in FTE, so it must be material expense.
Yeah, and a lot of that's dealing with the phone system. So you're seeing, and you'll see typically in IT and perhaps in other departments where there's a large capital expense or a lot of work focused on contractual services, you'll see those come up. We're also doing a transfer of our GIS services, and this is an issue paper that just went through council, to transfer some of our regionally hosted GIS services, geographic information systems, mapping services, from regional equipment to local equipment. And the reason for that is, you know, as agencies in the region tighten up their security, sharing some of those resources just becomes more complex and more difficult, in some cases less reliable because of all of the security controls are put in place. So this year you're seeing some phone system cost increases, you're seeing some of those GIS cost increases, and those would have been supplemental budget transfers between years, moving that money forward. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
For the most part, but I guess then do you see that those costs ongoing for fiscal year 22, 23 on out?
Some of the big capital expenditures for the phone system are in a sense, a one-time spend now, but like we were talking before with the life of a cabling system, as those assets reach the end of their life, they need to be replaced, then you would see some of those increases again. But like a cabling project increase, that's once every 20 years. We also have some server replacement coming up this next year, and that's about every 4 to 5 years for internal server replacement. So you're seeing some of those capital equipment being replaced.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And then that actually leads into one other question that I guess I'm still kind of wondering is we have every year we get a kind of vague, very overview look of how much we are behind in the street fund or anything like that. So for an equivalent for you, that would be capital outlay, so capital spending. In the next 5 to 10 years, if you could do everything you could, what type of budget are you looking at for that? And this is very, very rough. I just kind of, an idea for me.
Yeah, and I think, and Nate and I were just talking about our reserves and capital budget in IT actually just this morning or yesterday. And our reserves are okay. We're continually contributing to those. Again, I think it's going to be some of those areas like keeping up with security. That's it, because it's if you use the example of some of the enterprise systems, before we didn't patch those. And then about the last, 5 years ago, it was patching, once or twice a year. Now it's patching every quarter, and it's 3 or 4 weeks to do that work every quarter. So those kinds of things is probably what we're going to see more than the capital things.
Okay. Yeah. So it's more just like or even the software patches that come up with every program that has to be integrated.
We push them out to every PC. We push them out to every server. And it's happening, on a regular basis. Yeah, religiously. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Brand.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so next up on the list, we're all set for the next one is I have police on the list next.
Chair, I'm bringing up Matt Nywert now.
Perfect, thank you.
Hey, Luke, before we get started on this one, because I'm sure maybe this might be a good time if we want to take a minute to stretch everybody's legs.
I'm good with that. If everybody else is good to push on, I'm good to push on. But if anybody needs a break, this is probably going to go a while. So.
Maybe it's a good time. I think we did have an hour and a half, a 10-minute break scheduled. So why don't we take that 10-minute break? It's, let's see, 6:54. Let's plan on reconvening at 7:05. So Luke, before we start, just for some housekeeping, this evening we had scheduled an hour and a half for questions and discussion on the budget. And we're at that hour and a half point. But, you know, we can go as late as you'd like to go this evening. I just wanted to mention, you know, kind of based on the agenda, we have another 30 minutes scheduled for next week, but we also have it scheduled to wrap up the process next week. So just in terms of being mindful of how things are laid out and how you want it to go, you might want to have a conversation at some point with the group.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And we have CETA next week as well, correct?
The first hour next week will be for CETA, yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we should still have, well, Department of Public Works is broken into, and we're required to do both. That is split, correct? Because it's capital and.
Actually, no, we've got split into community development, operations, and environmental services department.
Okay, so we have three this time.
Three significant divisions.
Okay. Okay, so we still have quite a lot to get through then. In between this week and next week.
Potentially.
Yes.
And the capital will accompany the community development and the environmental services division for each of those respective components.
Holly?
All right, am I misremembering that we also reserved the week after next as a potential overflow?
We do have 4 potential meetings.
We have reserved that evening. And so historically, there's a conversation if you want to wrap things up and you're comfortable moving into 4. But as we start to get behind the schedule, that conversation usually happens.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, I have personal opinions about it, but I'm happy to hear from the group. And I at this point, I think that if we're going to get into police now, it's probably going to run quite a bit, and then we might push. I think it's probably a safe assumption to start considering at least week 4. Yes, Leonard. Sorry, Councilor Stair. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I welcome the input of everyone, but I would be content to forge ahead right now and just get through it.
Yeah. Councilor Mo. Oh, sorry. You're just okay. Got it. Don't want to miss you again. So, all right. So, yeah, let's go ahead and start off with the police then. And Matt.
Good evening. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Nywert. I'm a lieutenant with the police department. I'm the jail commander for our municipal jail and currently the acting chief, at least for short term. I've had an opportunity to look over the written questions that came in last week, and it looks like, with the exception of one, they were all answered, and that one question is pretty long and complicated, and will require some input from a variety of people, and we'll get that answered sometime this week. I'm welcome to attempt to answer any questions that you have. I will ask for your patience and understanding in the fact that I came into this very late in the game. So the presentation that you saw was actually done by Chief Lewis, and the budget that you're looking at, the documents that you've seen and have for your review were prepared prior to my involvement.
Okay. Councilor Stay. Councilor Stare, you're muted.
Matt, I know that we've been extensively briefed on this, but there are a lot of people that are going to be tuning in here that weren't in on previous discussions. Could you brief us on the timetable for the implementation of the body cams for the department?
Sure. The body cams are on their way. The training for that is actually taking place the end of this month. There's 2 days scheduled where GTAC, the company that we purchased from, is coming out on site. There'll be a day of training for the officers that'll be wearing them, and there'll be additional training for supervisors and what their role will look like in review of those and expectations for their use. So we're very close.
Thank you.
Other questions? No other questions? Comments? Muted myself. Go ahead, Holly.
Thank you. So I emailed a question, and I'm not sure if this is the question that is going to take time to respond to or not. I'm curious about the internal affairs software that was mentioned. So I'm wondering, so I guess my question was to sort of follow up on the decision to purchase it, which I think makes a lot of good sense. And also to get a sense of prior decision making, since in the previous answer, it was stated that it was not a priority the last time it was raised. My question then is, when competing priorities arose, what priority items were selected over IA Pro and Blue Team? Additionally, who makes those decisions and what is the process? Does it go through like a prioritization through the Springfield Police Advisory Committee or through council, or is there, so I guess what is that tree to make sure that the priorities of SPD align with the priorities of the city?
So to answer the first part of your question regarding IA Pro being brought up in the past, that was sometime years ago before I had any knowledge of it or any input or involvement in it. So I only know that through word of mouth. I can't answer that specifically as to when those conversations took place and honestly who they were involved with. I don't believe any of those people even work for the police department anymore. I don't know what priorities were put ahead of it, but I do remember there was talk about implementing that at one time years ago, and I don't know what the decision was for not doing so. I can only speak to over the last few months when I learned about it and found out what it was capable of. I was excited about it and advocated for it, and can tell you, in fact, I signed a contract with them earlier today.
Can I speak to this really quickly? I don't want to jump in and interrupt, Matt, but when I was talking with SPD about this, I think Matt's being really diplomatic right now. I was told that this issue did come up in the past. It was the decision was made by a prior chief, not Chief Lewis, even predating Chief Lewis. And I think it was because that particular chief wasn't a technology person. And, you know, I think that obviously we're here today, and Matt has been great about seeing the value in this, and I'm really excited he signed the contract. And I think everybody in SPD you know, is supportive of using this particular tool. As far as alignment with council priorities, I put that on all of our department directors. You know, are responsible for making sure that when they make decisions, it aligns with the council goals. I think that, you know, it's been a while since the council has revisited more a specific mission and vision statement. Shane alluded to that a little bit earlier. I think that would be a helpful process to go through at some point. And I know that that had started, and then that process was interrupted by COVID because it was a lot of, there were like community forums and things like that that obviously couldn't occur. So we need to kind of retool what that looks like. And that's a discussion that I think would be appropriate with the mayor, but I feel very encouraged by the leadership that I've seen with AIC Network.
Holly, if you want to.
Yeah, I feel like I have a follow-up to that. I've often heard with the use of blue teams or blue team, I apologize if I'm inappropriately pluralizing that, that it's often used best when it is managed by an external auditor or someone who is external to the department and can provide oversight. So how will this function within the department? Will there be oversight provided? How will that data be used and aggregated?
At this point, the plan is for supervisors, sergeants that supervise those work groups to oversee and ensure that that data is being entered accurately. I don't know that there's any plan to have an outside person oversee that. I think that would be up to the council.
Okay. Sorry, I have one more question. I noticed in your, unless Councilor Rodley, did you want to? No, okay, sorry, I don't like. I noticed in your fiscal year 22, which I realize you possibly did not write, but in the initiatives for fiscal year 22, there's talk about community outreach and crime prevention efforts. That community outreach coordinator, will that allow for more of a community policing model, or is that not the same thing?
All right, answer that with a yes and no. That, let me preface that by saying there's a lot of hiring processes going on right now, and that is one of them that we're fairly deep into and getting close on. The job description exists for that. In terms of community outreach, we had a community service officer in that role. We no longer have. That's been vacant for a short time. So that will still exist in terms of projects like Neighborhood Watch and National Night Out. But this new community outreach person will also have a role technology will play into with social media and media relations, local media relations.
Someone like PR?
Jump in really quick too. And part of my training on that first evening, we talked about the role of the budget committee and what they do and what they cannot do. And one of the things I mentioned that they cannot do is change a policy or priorities of the council. So I just kind of, if possible, I want to focus on the budget as opposed to policies of the city.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. I was actually asking about the initiative in their budget statement and trying to clarify and understand what it meant.
Councilor Rodley.
Thank you. So one of the things that's in here, and I know there's been chat about this before, been a bit of turnover, and this was part of what was talked about in here, is that there's been turnover and new hires. And I just wanted to, when I'm looking at just sort of the brief part, I'm just seeing FTE and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to just clarify whether or not the sort of anticipated costs of the turnover and replacing new officers and training and all of that is reflected in this budget for 22.
Those positions are in that budget. In fact, 2 of the positions have been removed. We removed a community service officer position and a records position. But the fact that we're down in staffing, those positions are budgeted for. That's what we're trying to do right now, is fill those positions.
Yeah, I hear that. I guess my question is more around the additional costs of turnover, of like hiring and training and recruiting, the sort of that. And I'm not an HR person, so I'm like, how would I ask about those additional costs that it costs to replace new officers, and whether or not that's reflected in the budget, as opposed to just the flat amount that we would be paying for those people if they just continued?
That's a good question. And that's a question I'd have to refer to our business manager, Jessica Crawford, to answer, and we'll get back to you with that.
Thank you.
Counselor Stair.
Thanks, Luke. Chief, I know that calls that come into the department that have a mental health component go straight through your dispatch. And I was wondering if it might be more economical for calls that clearly have a mental health component of them to go straight through to Cahoots instead of you having to funnel the calls through to them.
I don't know. I'm trying to envision how that would work, and just off the cuff, I don't see that working. It's important for our officers and dispatchers, for safety reasons, to know where Cahoots is at and who they're dealing with in the event that situation changes. Again, for safety reasons, if an officer needs to respond, there's oftentimes they're responding together. Dispatch would need to know. It's important dispatch knows where the officers and Cahoots are.
Well, would it be possible for them to call for backup if they thought that there might be a need for the PD to be involved?
Possibly, but again, for safety reasons, it's important to know where they are in advance and prioritize how they're responding to what type of calls, where they're needed sooner rather than later.
That's all I got. Thanks.
Councilor Pishneri.
I was just going to mention, I think I will, I think Corey was talking about Councilor Rodley was talking about, I think she just wanted to know, and correct me if I'm wrong, Corey, is what does it cost to, from hire to with a field training officer, what does it cost to put an officer's boots to the ground overall? So you got your training costs, you got your recruitment costs, you've got your academy costs, you've got your the various equipment costs, et cetera. So there's generally a number that's fairly well known to anticipate. If you need to hire 5 folks, then you need to make sure you budget about approximately this much money for those 5 folks to be able to hit the ground. Is that about what kind of like what you're asking?
Yes, and whether or not that is reflected in the budget or not. Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to get to.
And then the other part I was, who was it? Leonard, Councilor Steer. And I think too, I hope you're okay with me trying to translate, because I think I know you all well enough to know where you're coming from. And I think that what he's what Lieutenant or Chief Nyward, or whoever one you to call him today, is saying is that when you have a Cahoots call, it's similar to like fire. If there is any potential for violence, firefighters will not go in to that call until it's deemed safe. So it's very similar to that with Cahoots, is that if there is potential for violence or unpredictable behavior, they want to make sure it's safe for their staff to go in and make sure that nothing is going to be a violent response. And what Matt was talking about is that the time delay for them to go in and then determine, oh shoot, we're in trouble. Well, that time delay from them saying, oh, we're in trouble, and getting the help can be critical. And I think that's what Matt Nyward was saying, is that that's the fatal 5 minutes or fatal 3 minutes that could occur. And so that they're trying to decrease that time or eliminate that time. It's not a matter of trying to be overbearing or taking over. It's literally, it's a huge safety issue. Hopefully that is close to what you're looking at or answering or anyway.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm done. There you go. Go for it, Sean.
Well, I'm gonna unraise my hand ahead of time. So could you talk more about the staffing issue? Because we are constantly running recruits for patrol requisitions and interviews for patrol folks. When you think about, is that just the state of being in policing? Like, are we all constantly going to be hiring for the next couple of years and training as fast as we possibly can to get up to full staffing? Do you feel like we're going to get into full staffing in 6 months, 3 years? Could you just sort of talk a little bit about the trend?
Yeah, and understand from the time of hire, when we bring somebody on, they're really not a viable full-time police officer for nearly a year. When you throw in their on-the-job training, their field training program, their academy time, you're really close to a year before they're a full-time officer filling a position. And to put that in perspective, right now we have about 10 vacancies. The other challenge is, even if we could get 10 qualified people and bring them all at once, we can't train 10 people at a time. So there's some staggering that has to be done. It's also difficult in the current political climate to get a large pool of applicants to apply at one time. But the last 2 weeks, that's all I've done is work on hiring processes and interviewing people for different positions. And what's promising, what I see is, although the applicant pool is really small, I again believe because of the political climate, the applicants that we're getting are, I think, honestly, of a little higher caliber than we've seen in the past. They're people that are really committed to doing this job. They seem really committed to wanting to work specifically for the Springfield Police Department and serve the community of Springfield. I've heard it over and over and over when I ask, why do you want to work for Springfield specifically? It's one of the questions that I ask. And the answer that commonly comes about is they love the fact that the community of Springfield supports the police department and they want to be part of that, as opposed to other cities, and I won't name them, but people really seem to want to work for Springfield. It's just that we're not getting a large volume of people at one time, and we couldn't train them even if we did. I think we're going to get there, but we're well over a year out to get staffing up to any kind of level that makes a difference.
I would just tell, I guess, the advice I would have is hiring is the most critical portion of building a great organization. And I know that finding the right candidate is really important. And even when you're so short, it would be so easy to go, so-and-so is workable, let's take them, right? Like, and I would just encourage you to keep raising your standards so that we find the right people. So we spend the time with where we're going, get the people that you need, right? And if it takes 18 months instead of a year, then, I know that we've all got your back on that one.
I absolutely agree. And that's one of the reasons, to answer another part of your question, that you constantly see this ongoing process that the police department's hiring. The process that we just had will open up another one here shortly. We won't fill the vacancies that we have out of one process.
And just to clarify the financial question again, so Human Resources does the recruiting and right, like it organizes the hiring. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so does I know in some organizations there's an internal chargeback people pay to Human Resources for that sort of service. I don't think that's the case for us, right? Human Services just gets a staffing for a person and they do all the hiring. Is that right?
Well, to be honest, the police department participates pretty extensively in that process, just due to the fact that there's written tests, physical tests, interviews. But again, to answer the financial cost of what that process looks like, I don't know the answer to that or have it in front of me right now.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
I could probably answer that for you, Mayor. It is handled through the indirect, so it's really shared equally across all the departments. And I think it's been on the recognition that, hiring kind of happens in fits for different departments at different times for different reasons. And rather than having departments trying to absorb a hard year, it's easy for us to just smooth it out through the indirect.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying it.
Councilor Mo?
I'm hoping that these new applicants, and I'm glad they feel that Springfield supports their police, but I want to support our police, but are they, hopefully they're aware that change is coming, slow change, and they're willing, they're going to know that change is coming. They probably know what's going to be. Are they open to doing that? And so I think that new applicants will be more accepting of that than some of the older ones that just don't want to change. But the new ones, I have a lot of hope for.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think you're right. And we get to know that on the front end and train them the way we want them to be, the way the citizens of Springfield want them to be, rather than changing existing behaviors. We get to start from scratch, so to speak.
Yep, good.
Great. I just had two questions. One is we had business from the audience last week that raised the question of the costs associated with the K9 unit versus some issues with the K9 unit. So I guess if you could just speak to that, the cost benefit of the K9 unit, like what benefits come from that specific unit that justify the high costs and the chances for higher liability.
The K9 supervisor actually prepared his annual report recently because I had some questions about this. And regarding the written question, we may be talking about two different things, but there was a written question about K9 related injuries that will take some additional work to answer. And that's the memo that I said would follow later this week. But in terms of K9 costs, the dogs themselves are actually purchased through donations. They don't cost the city anything. Their food is donated, and the cost of the officer that's handling them, we would have that personnel cost anyway because they work full-time as a patrol officer. They just have the additional duty of a dog. But I asked for some numbers on kind of what they do. And in 2020, the K9 unit deployed on 871 calls for service. They're used 871 times. That includes for the Springfield, for the G, for the Sheriff's Office, Oregon State, and on occasion a federal agency if they requested them. They made 72 arrests out of those deployments. And when you add in the detection dogs too and their use, so it was a little bit limited in 2020 due to staffing, one of the dogs not being utilized as it could have been, should have been due to staffing and COVID, but regarding some drug seizures and forfeited money seized, you're at over about $850,000 in cash was seized as a result of the dogs working last year.
Thank you. The other question I had is about Cahoots. And I know that Cahoots is an amazing program and it's something that I want to see supported. So my question is more about the budget this year says it's our contribution is almost $500,000 now. And that will be expected at that rate or in the future, or that rate we're looking at that's going to go up in 2 years, 3 years, something like that. And I guess what types of steps are being taken to ensure that that extremely important community service is continuing? And I guess a follow-up to that is how much has Kahoot's been used as a pilot program for other communities around the country that are looking for alternative solutions? And is that something you've tried, that the police department has tried reaching out as a program?
Absolutely, and I agree, it is a valuable program. It's a great program. Obviously, you see that the costs went up due to the percentage change that the city has to cover. I anticipate it stays the same or continues to go up just as other costs do. In terms of it being a pilot program, I personally haven't talked to other agencies, but I know command staff within our agency has been contacted by police departments literally from all around the country and answered questions on how we utilize it, how it works, why it works. It is a great program.
Yeah, and I don't remember the numbers exactly, but I know we've been talked about in the past that those types of calls that come in are they're spending 90 minutes on the call just dealing with the person, trying to get them the services they need, which just saves everybody in the police department not only that time and energy and money, but it also better addresses the underlying problem and is not necessarily something that the police need to be dealing with in the community. So
correct, and oftentimes it's a very, very, very valuable resource. But keep in mind in thinking of that, it requires on the subject's part, individual's part, it requires that they're voluntarily speaking with or being transported by Kahoot. And that's what I touched on earlier, is oftentimes that the police have to end up stepping in to resolve that in some manner if there isn't that cooperation.
oh yeah, it's never something that you can imagine completely replacing anything in the police department, but it is a perfect tool to supplement those issues in the community. So
agreed.
So Holly.
Sorry, did I hear correct that the canines were deployed last year in the year of 2020 about 800 times for various agencies?
Correct, throughout either the city of Springfield or requests from other agencies. We often get calls from other agencies in the local area for our dogs, even agencies that have their own dogs. If they don't have canines on duty, they'll request ours.
If they're deployed for an agency that isn't the Springfield Police Department, does the asset forfeiture or seizure benefit the Springfield budget? So the 800,000, 850,000.
I don't know what the percentages are, but to answer your question, yes.
So we would get the full $850,000 that was seized by canines into
Not
the Springfield
necessarily.
budget.
That's why I said it would be a percentage of that. I don't know what the full dollar amount is if it's another agency's case.
Okay, that would be helpful information, I think. From the use of force report, the annual report that was presented, it looked like they were deployed 30 times in Springfield. And so it seems like the bulk of the canine deployment would have been external. So knowing what the percentage.
No, you're misrepresenting the use of the word deployment.
I'm sorry, that's what it says in the thing. So I'm just misunderstanding as opposed to misrepresenting, but thank you.
Yeah, a deployment could be any use of the dog, whether it's an article search for something or searching for somebody. It doesn't mean that it resulted in any type of, it doesn't necessarily mean that it resulted in any type of use of force. Those are different things.
Okay. Councilor Mo?
I have three questions now. I understand Springfield is the city that has a K9 available, and it goes out to other cities like Eugene, whatever the uses are out there. So is Springfield subsidizing those K9s for use of the other departments out there? And what's that costing us? And I got three questions actually. And my second question is on the K9s. I gotta find it here. It's up to 726,000 this year from 411,000 last year. That's quite a jump. I'm curious why that is. And my third question, thank you, is at the school resource officers. I heard that they may be backing off on that. I don't know. I'm curious about that. So those are three scattered questions.
So your first question about other agencies using, requesting the canines and vice versa, there's mutual aid agreement that we cooperate with the other agencies. Obviously, there's not always a canine on duty with every department. So when one's needed, it can be requested of another agency. That's pretty common between our local agencies, law enforcement partners working together.
I think that's great, but it sounds like it's costing us a lot of money to do that for them. So that's my question. And again, so go ahead.
In terms of the SRO program, it's still up and running. It's just on a limited basis due to how school is and has been structured due to COVID. So they're supplementing our patrol staffing right now, handling calls for service on day shift, but they're also in and out of and available at the schools, not as much as they were historically when schools were up and running full time.
And I guess my other one was the K9 from last year was 411,000. This year's 726,000.
And that's another answer that I'll have to get back to. I agree. I don't know what that change is. Jessica Crawford maybe can answer that now, but that could be part of a follow-up because there's some other follow-up questions about K9 that have been asked that we need to meet with the supervisor of that program to get those answers.
That'd be fine. Thank you.
And Councilor Stair, do you have a question?
Let's see.
You're not muted.
Okay. Yeah, actually, Councilor Mo asked the question that I had. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Oh, Mayor.
So could you clarify the issue about sort of canine calls for service? If when you cite numbers, okay, so you said that that right now, if a canine unit sort of normally acts as a patrol unit and is a sort of a patrol officer and that happens to have a canine, did I hear that correctly?
The canine officers have their dog with them while they're on duty. There could also be scenarios where if needed, they could be called out from home off duty. That's not as frequent, but that could happen.
So hypothetically, right, and if they have a call for service and that unit responds, is the dog coming out every single time? Okay.
No.
So in the case that the canine unit shows up for a call of service and they don't deploy the dog, is it when you cite sort of how many times that these canine units have responded, is it the officer responding, or is that how many times they actually got the dog at whatever the incident is?
The deployment is only counted. It's counted by the officer. They keep a log of every time they quote unquote deploy their dog when they use the dog on that call for service in some capacity. Otherwise, the dog honestly stays in the car. The officer can go about their business on normal routine calls. The dog doesn't get out of the car.
Yeah, but so normally when you're sort of talking about the police department, if you say, right, like when you say the number that, you know, we've deployed a canine unit, that's the amount of time the officer shows up and the dog is actually deployed and used at that call for service.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Councilor Pishneri?
I just want to make a quick comment to Matt, and it's just coming from me as far as I just want to emphasize to you that during your hiring process that you don't rush it. You pick the absolute best candidates. Not that you're not trying, but I'm just don't feel as though you have to rush through and drop any standards. You need to make sure that we get the best folks possible for this position. And that's just as long as you know that, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree with you. And I think that's where some of the frustration comes from, is we just constantly have to keep having processes to get a couple candidates here and there.
Have you heard of any police agency basically up to full capacity and not in a hiring mode?
No.
So that's the reality of it, folks. It's constant hire mode, and that it's hard on those type of organizations. It's hard on the cities, the municipalities, but it's all about trying to get the best folks. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Any other questions?
I can answer the question in regards to the K-9 costs and the increase in the budget. It's not a change in the overall budget. There was no change in the cost of the program. What has changed is how the department is allocating costs to the program. And specifically in this case, it was allocating more administrative costs to this program. And that's something that we've been struggling with as organizations. We've been using program accounting, is what's the best way to capture that cost of the full program. And sometimes we have shifts from year to year as we kind of realize that we're not capturing that full cost. But there's actually no change in the cost of the program itself, other than the potential of inflation and personnel.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Nancy.
It was my turn tonight. Just quick comment. Just wanted to thank Acting Capacity Chief Nyworth, his first appearance before our budget committee and in short notice. And also it would be like doing a thesis presentation for a thesis you didn't write, to use it like a grad school comparison. So I want to thank you. And just, he's been so great to work with. As far as the K-9 program, I appreciate, Nate, that clarification. I from my own perspective, my joke is I want my dog to observe the K-9s so that he can see another dog obeying commands.
Okay. Other questions? All right. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Luke, one thing I failed to mention earlier in regards to time is we do want to.
Yes, business from the audience. Yes,
excellent.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, and we've been at this for 2 hours, 15 minutes already. Yeah, so probably call it for the departments this week, business from the audience, and then start again next week. Unless anybody has a real desire to keep pushing for. No? All right. Sounds good. Okay. Yeah, so do we have business from the audience?
So Chair, I've just allowed the members of the audience to begin raising their hands. I'll give them a moment to indicate a desire to speak, and then I'll let you know who's first up.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes. And I will remember next week to make the announcement before the whole meeting starts, since I got your notes.
So Chair, right now we have Dana Purchett, and we don't have anybody else following Dana. So perfect. Dana, you should now be able to unmute on your end.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Dana Herkett, Ward 1. I just wanted to hop on and voice my support for our library. Our library is amazing. I'm an early childhood educator, and our library has been so key for me by providing teaching resources and books, especially throughout the past year when we were all scrambling to figure out how to teach young children from home. And all the library staff are so kind and so helpful. I just wanted to voice my full support. Moving on, in looking at the budget numbers, I think it would be helpful to see the amount of money the city is paying out to police misconduct claim deductibles. I'd just like to see how much that is in comparison to what community services like our library are receiving. It's just really not clear exactly how many of those we're paying out or where that money is coming from. And now it's up to $500,000 per claim deductible. And our police department is basically uninsurable. Am I getting that right? As a Springfield homeowner, I want the city that I've chosen to purchase a home in to prioritize services that proactively help people or enrich people's lives, like our library, providing free access to resources and the internet, providing a warm, safe place to go, a place where everyone is welcome, as opposed to spending 40.3% of our funds on a police department that has entirely lost the trust of a good portion of our citizens. It leaves me wondering what other department could be plagued by the same levels of liability and lack of public trust and still receive over 40% of our budget. Thank you.
You, Dana?
Chair, the next speaker is Chris McAllister, and I show no one else interested in speaking after Chris. Chris, you should be able to speak on your end.
Thank you. My name is Chris McAllister. I live in Ward 3. I appreciate the time to come before this committee as it deliberates on our future goals. I want to bring up a couple items. First, the police interactions. We pay for business cards. I think our police should be required to hand them when citizens are engaged with them, instead of telling them that they don't need to use them, or this doesn't warrant that, or they just happen to forget them in their office. I think that if we're paying for things, they should be able to be used so our community knows who they're talking to, especially when they're told to move along, not in our town and things like that. I also think that we should look at trauma-informed engagement. We should pay for training and supports like that for not just our officers, but also our dispatchers and the file clerks who take overflow calls. When they are the first ones responding, when cahoots calls are coming in and they don't understand the problem, they judge the caller or they misrepresent what the abilities of cahoots are. It really hurts the ability to use cahoots. And as such, as someone in the community who deals with a lot of homeless engagement and relief works, we find that most people won't use cahoots when it does go through the police. It's a lot easier to try and flag people down. We also need more support for things in Spanish. There's not materials so much for those who are supporting someone who is incarcerated in Spanish as there are materials in English. And we've met with the police department about that before. If there's a way to separate cahoots and have it go through fire and EMS, that'd be great. They are actually the ones who deal with crisis and can help dispatch. It's all the same call centers in many of our areas, and that will help. In terms of the library, we have an awesome resource. I love our librarians. We did awesome during COVID. I hope we continue to support and expand that. We need a new library, and perhaps we could have library services go to folks in jail. That will help us work on repairing work and doing some community justice. I'd like to see us utilize Booth Kelly as an industrial city-owned property. If we're going to pay for upgrades of services, let's use it more for utilizing skills and resource building for our community. I really appreciate the hard work and deliberation all of y'all are doing. And one more item, going back to the trauma-informed engagement, I really think that we need to spread that to our EMS workers as well. Sometimes our unhoused people are left on the street because they had too much attitude or whatnot. And so I really think we need to share the compassion. People are doing very stressful jobs all the time, and life and death matters about whether or not we will pick up the phone and call 911, or if we call 541-726-3714. I do appreciate all y'all, and I hope you have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Chair, I show no other hands, and we have no written or email comment at this time.
Okay. Thank you. So and that will conclude the business from the audience, and that should be it for the week then. All right. So we'll see you all next week then.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Bye.